Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Barry Bergman, and I am a member of Temple Emmanuel's Israel Action Committee. Today's seminar is What's Up with Gaza? We are honored to have as our speaker today Dr. Ronit Marzan, who is an advisor to security bodies in Israel and a research fellow at the Chaikin Chair in Geostrategy at the University of Haifa. She has served 32 years in the intelligence community, serving as a major in Unit 8200 and as an expert on Arab affairs in the Israel Security Agency, Shabak. As a teaching fellow at the Political Science School of the University of Haifa, Dr. Marzan teaches at the National Security Programs and taught the Chavatzalot program, training intelligence researchers for the Intelligence Corps. Dr. Marzan holds a BA and a PhD from the Middle Eastern History Department at the University of Haifa, where she received an Excellence Award for her doctoral dissertation. She also holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Haifa. In 2016, Resline published Dr. Marzan's book, Yasser Arafat, Rhetoric of a Lone Leader. Her upcoming book, The Father, the Son, and the Spirit of the Revolution, The Young Arabs in the Arab Spring, has won the Bahat Prize for being an original and high-quality manuscript. It will soon be published by Pardes Press and the University of Haifa. Please note that this seminar may be shared publicly. If you do not wish to appear, please turn off your camera in the Zoom settings. If you wish not to appear at all, please change your name to initials or a nickname. I know that there will be a lot of questions, so please enter your questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. I will present these questions to Ronit at the end of her talk. We will only take questions from the chat box. Ronit, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I am happy to be with you today, and thank you for inviting me to speak about the situation in the Gaza Strip. I hope you enjoyed my lecture, and I would like to open my lecture with a brief background on a Gaza Strip. The length of the Gaza Strip is about 40 kilometers. Its total area is about 365 square kilometers. The population is estimated at 2 million people. The morbidity rates today are confirmed cases of the corona COVID-19 is 54 and 932 people. The deaths is 548 people, and recovered is 52,000 people that recovered. I want to, this is about the morbidity of the COVID-19, but I want to talk about how Israel controls various aspects of life in Gaza Strip: territorial waters, airspace, land crossing, the Palestinian population registry, and part of detection system. The population in Gaza suffers from national schism, dictatorial regime, and violation of human rights of their leaders. Rounds of military confrontation with Israel, high unemployment rates, and I will talk about it later, lack of funding for long-term projects that will allow the Strip to be developed instead of focusing only on short-term humanitarian responses. Israel has delivered last week 5,000 vaccines to the Palestinian Authority and to the medical staff of the Palestinian Authority, and 1,000 vaccines to the Gaza Strip. Continued Israeli and Egyptian control of border crossings making it difficult for free movement of merchants, students, and sick people, as well meetings with relatives and traveling abroad. But, you know, it is not only the population suffers from Israel occupation. It also suffers from the regime, Hamas regime, the Hamas movement that control Gaza Strip. And I want to talk about what happens with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Hamas movement is changing. It transformed itself from a terrorist organization to a political actor. And I want to talk about the changes in Hamas discourse, national discourse. The first change that I want to mention is the transition of the movement from the Muslim Brotherhood movement, which consists only of Muslims, to a Palestinian national movement that cooperates with all other factions. The second transition of the movement, of the discourse of the movement, is a transition from maximalist goals, such as liberating all Palestine from the sea to the river and establishing an Islamic State, to more realistic goals, an independent Palestinian state with full sovereignty within the border of 4 June 1967. The third change of the discourse of the movement is the transition from jihad, holy war, against the Jews and opposition to peace initiatives, to the struggle against the Zionist occupation, not the Jews, but against the Zionist occupation. An agreement to combine political struggle and armed struggle. And now I will ask the question, why did the leaders of the movement decide to moderate the discourse? They have a lot of challenges. The challenges in the international arena, the struggle of the international community against radical Islam and Hamas' aspiration to gain international legitimacy require from Hamas to differentiate itself from the jihadist discourse calling for the extermination of Jewish and Christian infidels, and to validate a discourse of national liberation, human rights, and religious tolerance. It also requires from Hamas to prove that it ready to use force against radical jihadist organization and agrees to maintain a ceasefire with Israel and enter a political process. The challenges in the Islamic Arab arena. And I will begin with Syria. Hamas foreign leadership had forced to leave Syria because it supported the Syrian rebels in the Arab Spring. Its departure to Qatar distanced it geographically from the Palestinian arena. Iran. Hamas has lost the Iranian material and logistical assistance because it supported Syrian rebels. And what about Egypt? Following Morsi removal from power, Hamas lost the ability to use border crossing and smuggling tunnels freely. Hamas leadership in Gaza understands that if it wants an opening to the outside world, it must ensure good relations with Egypt and not cooperate with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Qatar and undermine the Egyptian power. And what about Qatar? Qatar has working for decades to replacing the Arab regimes with Islamic regimes, especially in Egypt. Therefore, it deepens its intervention in Gaza by strengthening Khaled Mash'al and Hamas foreign leaders living in Qatar at the expense of Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, who is supported by Egypt. Turkey, the reconciliation between Israel and Turkey has led to a certain restrictions of Hamas operational activity in Turkey. And what about the challenges that Hamas confronted with in the conflict with Israel? Israel's success in dealing with the smuggling tunnels and rocket fire through the Iron Dome and the construction of defensive wall forces Hamas to change direction. The military clashes between Hamas and Israel have killed many young people without advancing the lifting of the siege on Gaza. And here we see a graffiti on the wall in Gaza facing Israel, and the boy asked or said, "I see you. Do you see me?" And in Arabic, "Ana arak, hal tarani?" The challenges in the Palestinian arena, and they have a lot of challenges in this arena. National crisis. Hamas failed to reconcile with Fatah and to reunite the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Hamas also failed to formulate a national vision and common struggle strategy. Socioeconomic crisis. The people of Gaza suffer from shortage of electricity, fuel, and clean water, unemployment, poverty, sexual violence in the family, and COVID-19 epidemic. Overall unemployment rate is 42%, 34% are men, and 65% are women. The unemployment rate 15 to 24 age is 61%, 55% men, and 85% women. Conflict with opponents such as the Palestinian Authority. The sanction imposed by the Palestinian Authority on Gaza increase the unrest and resentment against Hamas, especially among the younger generation. Palestinian leaders promised their people a path to freedom and empowerment, yet in the last 2 decades, they developed a culture of dependency rather than resourcefulness, an expectation of external salvation rather than self-reliance. In the photo, we see young people firebug, photos of Abu Mazen and Rami Hamdallah, the former prime minister. The Palestinian factions, it's a very huge challenge for Hamas. Hamas prefer not to clash with them, with the extremist factions in Gaza, and allow their presence to prove Israel and convince it that Hamas is more moderate than them. It also doesn't want to upset the Iranians who fund these factions. In the picture we see on the right, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, and Ziad Nakhala, the leader of the Islamic Jihad, which is Hamas' main rival in Gaza Strip. The two movements are fighting for the same cadre of Islamic activists, and each is trying to prove that it is more patriotic than the other. The Islamic Jihad, we have to understand, is a military organization, and it doesn't have an extensive political infrastructure as Hamas. Therefore, it prefers to prevent Hamas from becoming a political player, and it drags it from time to time into a military escalation with Israel. On the left, we see a demonstration by the Popular Front activists crying Iranian flags in the Gaza Strip as a token of gratitude for Iranian aid during one of the military clashes with Israel. Hamas contained the demonstration so as not to upset the Iranians who support the Popular Front after a black cat passed between Hamas foreign leadership and Iran. Another challenge of Hamas is the clans, the Hamulas. There are criminal Hamulas who commit terrorist actions against Israel to jeopardize the political process. In 2006, Durmush clan kidnapped Gilad Shalit and eliminated real progress that has been achieved between Israel and Hamas by a German mediator regarding long-term Hudna ceasefire with Israel. In 2014, 3 Israeli boys were kidnapped by an independent group of terrorists from Hebron. 2 months after signing a reconciliation agreement between Hamas and Fatah. On the right, we see weapons that Hamas seized from Durmush clan that abducted Gilad Shalit, and on the left, the 3 Israeli boys who were abducted and murdered by an independent Hamas cell. And what about the younger generation in Gaza? About 30% of the Palestinian population are young people aged 15 to 29. They are considered generation in waiting, who suffer from exclusion and marginalization in all aspects of life. Many of them develop behavioral deviation, sexual violence, drug smoking, prostitution, alcoholism, crime, and terrorism, out of despair and loss of hope. In the picture, we see a boy who left school and went to work as a street vendor to help his family. The employment rate of children aged 10 to 17 has increased greatly in recent years as children have to replace the aging unemployed father and help earn a living. The Palestinian student suffers from military conflicts, lack of fuel and electricity outgaze that affects their studies. They are unable to pay tuition in the absence of work, nor can they integrate into the labor market in the absence of social, political ties ties in the right places. Most young people have lost faith in the political system, and they feel they are not involved in the national decision making. There is a decrease in support for Fatah and Hamas, and an increase in the rate of those who don't support any political party. On the right, we see a boy playing with what remained of an exploded missile instead of playing in normal kindergarten. On the left, children sitting by candlelight in the absence of electricity in Gaza. Children sit on gallons, on empty gallons, waiting to fill with clean waters. Here are some sentences written by young Palestinians on their Facebook pages to express their feelings of anger and disgust towards Hamas leader in Gaza. We are disgusted with you, leave us alone. And in Arabic, إحنا كرفناكم حلوا عنا يا كذابين. My heart is dead. قلبي ميت in Arabic. Our hearts become ice and our emotions below zero. قلوبنا صار جليد وإحساسنا تحت الصفر. Your split is our suffering. انقسامكم معاناتنا. These kind of people cannot create a homeland. أمثال هؤلاء لا يصنعون وطن. شرطي جوعان بيتوخ على مواطن جوعان مشان يحمي القائد الشبعان. A hungry policeman shoots a hungry citizen to protect sated commander. Young Palestinian who committed a terrorist attack wrote on his Facebook, in heaven, you don't suffer, you don't cry, you don't hate, you don't envy, you are not sad, you are not waiting. Remember, generation in waiting. Who even are you? Muhammad el-Taluli, an activist from Gaza, ran away from Gaza, and today he lives in Greece helping refugee refugee children from Syria. And he asked Hamas leaders on a YouTube, feel us, consider us your children. We don't want the homeland. We don't want to return it. We want humanitarian back. Treat us as your sons. Bring back the humanity that has been died in us. Bring back the... I don't see the figure. Okay. We want humanity back. Treat us as your son. Bring back the love that has been died in us. Bring back the day we held hands together. Isn't it enough that your Palestinian identity dead, your humanity is dead as well? The young women want to liberate themselves from the oppressive practices and traditions. They want to feel like princesses and birds. Customs and traditions as burdens on women on her path to achieve human rights. We see the shackles on her legs, and she climbing in order to achieve حقوق المرأة in Arabic and rights, human rights, women rights in English. How they find these young people, how they find the fight to change the destiny. The young people demonstrated in the street and screamed, "We want to live like the ruler's son. He is no better than us. Let us live. Let us breathe." But Hamas police stopped them and tortured them. And in Arabic, they call بدي أعيش زي ابن المسؤول. دعونا نتنفس. Some of Gaza young people committed suicide, but we don't know the numbers because the government doesn't report it. In the photo, we can see Fathi Harb and Muhannad Younes, who committed suicide because of financial difficulties and lack of self-fulfillment. Some middle-class young people immigrate abroad, and some come to the borders fence and ask the soldier of Israel, "Please take us to the prison in Israel because life there is better than Gaza." Activism. They paint on the stones instead of throwing them on Israeli soldiers. They sing rap songs, which they criticize the patriarchal order, the tyrannical regime, the corrupt rulers, and also against Israel occupation. They paint inspiring figures in authentic materials like coffee powders and henna. They sculpture in the sand visual representation or images that express their dreams on freedom and peace. They adopt also TED idea to share their personal and national stories with the outside world, and it called it TED Shajaiya. Virtual activism. They open Facebook pages called "We Are Not Numbers" and "We Are Beyond the Fence." In Hebrew, the "We Are Beyond the Fence" is a Facebook that in Hebrew we said "אנחנו שמעבר לגדר." Another challenge of Hamas in Gaza Strip is the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. In the last years, as a result of the confidence crisis between the Palestinian public and its leaders from Hamas and Fatah, educated Palestinians, leftists and Islamists, and NGOs activists from the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Israel, and the diaspora have begun to work on a new national vision and struggle strategy. They aim to advance the one-state solution to which all Palestinian refugees will return. They believe that this is much more realistic solution than a call for the for the destruction of Israel or a demand for the establishment of an independent state. They prefer to drag Israelis into non-violent civil struggle that will expose its racial face. The economic situation is not the essence of the story in Gaza, but the national humiliation. The Palestinian people don't want to be treated as beggars. Personal and national respect is very important to them. Among the projects they initiated are the Great Return March on the Gaza border, demonstration in Ramallah and Haifa, the establishment of the Palestinian Forum, etc. The return marches were supposed to be a civil and cultural struggle, But Hamas and the Palestinian armed factions in the Gaza Strip feared that these ideas would gain international legitimacy and make the armed struggle unnecessary. As a result, they took control of these marches and turned them into a violent struggle. The photo below illustrates how Hamas and the other armed factions pushed aside the activists of civil society organizations and turned the non-violent struggle into violent one. On the right, a Palestinian boy climbs the fence and waves the Palestinian flag. On the left, a Palestinian boy cuts the fence and sets it on fire. On the right, Palestinians paint on tires and plant trees. On the left, Palestinians burn tires and throw stones. On the right, Palestinians dressed up as clowns to make the children happy. On the left, the clown who comes to make the children happy stands sad against the background of the fire and smoke. On the right and in the center, we see Palestinians send balloons and pigeons, and on the left, Palestinians send incendiary kites. The return marches on the Gaza border have turned tens of thousands of young people to become disabled people, generation on crutches. And the younger generation, or the young people in Gaza and also in the West Bank, they want, first of all, we want freedom, and the rest is small details. They wrote on the wall. And what about the challenges in Hamas movement itself? There are three competing approaches in Hamas. The first one is the radical approach of Ismail Haniyeh and Saleh El-Arouri. Ismail Haniyeh and Saleh El-Arouri have close ties with Iran and Hezbollah. Both live abroad, one in Lebanon and the other in Qatar. They may take advantage of the Palestinian refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon and their proximity to Hezbollah training bases to establish an alternative terrorist infrastructure to Gaza. But I want to remark, Ismail Haniyeh is a leader who is influenced by other leaders in the movement. It depends on where he lives. While he lives in Gaza, he has collaborated with Yahya Sinwar. Now he lives in Qatar and influenced by radical Hamas leaders in Qatar and Lebanon. The second approach is the middle approach of Khaled Mash'al. Khaled Mash'al is supported today by Qatar. He lives there. Qatar wants to establish Islamic regimes throughout the Middle East. Mash'al wants to lead the PLO and turn it into a body who is responsible for making national decisions, especially in matters of peace and war, with Israel, and at the same time to make the Palestinian Authority of Abu Mazen to be responsible for daily life of the Palestinians, not the national life. He believes that the Palestinian must take advantage of the regression in the Zionist project, the withdrawal of Israel from Lebanon and Gaza, and the social and parliamentary crisis in Israel. The third approach is the conciliatory and moderate approach of Yahya Sinwar, head of Hamas political bureau in Gaza. He prefers to preserve Hamas authority in Gaza and has no ambitions to take over the West Bank. He believes that alliance with Egypt and national unity with Fatah are the keys to solve the economic, social, political, and national problems. He expressed readiness to subordinate Hamas weapons to the PLO, which will decide on peace and war matters. He stresses that Hamas is not interested in a war with Israel. If Sinwar will fail to achieve national reconciliation with Fatah and will not be able to remove the sanctions were imposed on the Gaza Strip, then he will have no choice but to return to the armed struggle. This will be a missed opportunity for both sides. Of all the three approaches, Sinwar approach is least dangerous for Israel. And I want to conclude with a few questions. The first one, is it in Israel's interest for Hamas to become a political player? Treating Hamas as a political player alongside the Palestinian Authority may increase its responsibility for the population in Gaza and its willingness to impose fire discipline on all opposition factions in Gaza Strip and prevent it from sabotaging the political process. Should Israel consider the Palestinian national unity as a threat or as an opportunity? On the one hand, national unity may strengthen the political and military power of the Palestinians and may pose a threat to Israel in the absence of political progress. On the other hand, national unity may allow Israel to conduct itself in the face of a unified political arena. A united government that enjoys high governance will not want to jeopardize its achievements in the international arena, and it may prefer to curb radicals and emphasize its moral character rather than its terrorist nature. Does Israel have to continue with the approach that there is no partner on the other side, or does it have to resume negotiations? The attitude that there are no partners on the other side and the failure to provide political reward to those who follow a political path strengthens those who support an armed struggle. If we want to motivate Hamas to follow the political path, to move it away from the Iran-Hezbollah Syria axis of resistance in favor of the moderate axis of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, we must equip it with significant political achievements, such as open borders for workers, students, and sick people, constant supply of water and electricity, and release of prisoners. The contribution of Abu Mazen to relative quiet of the past 15 years has not been valued by either Israel or the United States. By failing to reach a deal with him, Israel sacrificed long-term strategic gains for short-term tactical consideration. Should Israel allow Qatar to increase involvement in Gaza? Qatar is a dangerous country that supports the Muslim Brotherhood movement throughout the Middle East and undermines the moderate Arab states that have signed peace and normalization agreement with Israel. It uses lulling rhetoric, flatters, and then strikes. It mustn't be allowed to establish an Islamic regime in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank on the expense of a democratic and liberal Palestinian state that may be established in the future. Israel should stop Qatar financial aid to Gaza because it allows Hamas to use the money for the benefit of the population, and thus it can divert the tax money, it collects from the population for military intensification. Should Israel demand the dismantling of the military factions or compromising on the gradual integration of the armed factions into the Palestinian security forces? On the one hand, Israel fears that Hamas will emulate Hezbollah model in Lebanon. On the other hand, it is not advisable to use language that harms the heroic image of the factions and humiliate them. Using the word integration instead of crushing may persuade this faction to subordinate their weapons to the central government. This picture reflects, to some extent, the desire of Hamas leaders to make a change in the movement discourse. On the right, we see the boy sitting on Yahya Sinwar's knees was dressed in military clothes at the end of military round with Israel. On the left, the boy sitting on Yahya Sinwar's knees was dressed in civilian clothes at the launch of the new moderate political document in May 2017. Israelis should take advantage the changes to confront Hamas with its statements regarding a Palestinian state within 67 borders and its willingness to consider the political path alongside the armed struggle, as well to convince its leaders that the political path is more rewarding than the armed struggles. Can Israel afford not to advance the two-state solution? The Israeli interest is to advance the two-state solution with Hamas and Fatah. Otherwise, Israel will have to deal with young Palestinians who strive to advance the one-state solution. This will put an end to the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. The Israelis will become minorities. They will not agree that the Palestinians will have the right to vote in the elections, and the state will become an apartheid state. Israel must choose between democracy or full demographic control. It is in our hands, Israelis and Palestinians, to choose roses or guns. And this picture I took from a Facebook page of a young man in Jenin. Roses or gun? We have to decide, Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you. Barry, you asked me about the elections. I prepared some remarks if you want.
Sure. So you're talking about in terms of the upcoming Israeli elections or the upcoming Palestinian elections, I suppose.
I prepare about the Palestinian elections.
Yes. What's the effect of those elections? What do you think the effect is of those elections on Hamas?
Okay, so some remarks on the Palestinian elections. The election will be as follows. At the beginning, in May 22, it will be elections to the Legislative Council. In 31 July, it will be election to the presidency. And in 31 and August 31, the election to the national councils. To the National Council, the Palestinian National Council, not the legislative, it's different. National Council is the National Council and the PLO, okay? And Legislative Council is of the Palestinian Authority. 2,600,000 of the voters have already registered. 93% already registered to vote to the elections, and it's very high registration. It's very I think we learn about how the people in Gaza and in the West Bank so much want to elect the leaders democratically. And I want to share with you some of my remarks. Why Fatah and Hamas agree on elections? It's very important to ask this, to understand this question, because the two movements want to persuade the Arab and the Western leaders to recognize a unity government that includes Hamas and Fatah, and to retain the international aid funds, and to remove Palestinian faction from the list of terrorist organizations, and to put pressure on Israel to end the occupation. This is a very important. If they go to elections, maybe the international arena, they can get these things. In the regional challenges, they have also in the regional arena, they have a lot of challenges, and the election can let them confront with these challenges. The two movements cannot cope alone with the implication of the Arab Spring, with the deal of the century, with the normalization agreement, with the pressure exerted by Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and Turkey to end the national split. In the internal challenges, the two movements want to reaffirm by the election their legitimacy and restore the trust of the Palestinian public. They also want to share the responsibility for managing political and economic crises. And it's very important to understand that not only the movements have interest, it's also their leaders. Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and Khaled Mashal, the leader of Abu Mazen, the leader of Fatah, and Khaled Mashal, the leader of Hamas. And both of them shared interests. After Mahmoud Abbas and Khaled Mashal realized that none of their movements could gain legitimacy for political hegemony in the changing Palestinian arena, that the strategy of armed and political struggle against Israel have failed, and that the national and political and economic and social crises are too heavy to deal with them separately, they have decided to put the disagreement aside, even for a while, to save each other. And I want to talk a little about Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas will be 86 years old in November, and he would not want to be remembered as a leader who divided his people, submitted to Israel dictates, and corrupted the government system. He wants to be remembered as a democratic leader who conducted 2 sets of elections, and in the second, he even presented a list of educated and young candidates instead of the old and aging political elite. But he has 2 rivals, Marwan Barghouti and Muhammad Dakhlan. Muhammad Dakhlan lives in Abu Dhabi. Marwan Barghouti is imprisoned in Israel. The two very popular in the refugee camps, and one of them is even considered a national symbol and a hero in the eyes of the masses. Barghouti intends to run in the presidential election. Dakhlan is running an independent list in the legislative council election. Khaled Mashal, the leader of Hamas that lives in Qatar, will be 65 years old in May, and he would not want to end his political career as head of the Shura Council and to be remembered as a corrupt man. He lives a life of luxury in Qatar, far away from the bloody battlefield in Gaza. He would like to be elected again to the head of Hamas political bureau, reaffirm the firm leader's status as a sole negotiator vis-a-vis regional and international mediators, and one day to become the head of the Palestinian National Council or head of the PLO. Mashal will have to ensure that Abbas will not stop in the Legislative Council election and will continue to the election of the Palestinian National Council of the PLO. It's a different thing. And allow Hamas and Islamic Jihad to join them as members. He will have to weaken Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. He is the head of the political bureau in Gaza of Hamas, who is considered a national patriot and has a full legitimacy and support of the Azadin brigades than he has, Khaled Mash'al. And Dahlan and Senwar are allies. Why? Because the arrogant behavior of the two fathers, Abbas and Mash'al, towards the unloved son, Dahlan and Senwar, motivated Dahlan and Senwar to become allies. Senwar needs Dahlan to share with him the public responsibility for running the Gaza Strip, and he take advantage of Dahlan political stature in the United States, United Emirates, and Israel to lift the siege on Gaza and keep Mash'al and Qatar away from Gaza. Dahlan of Fatah, that lives in the Emirates, needs Senwar to convince the US administration, the quartet, and Israel that he is the most suitable candidate to achieve reconciliation with Hamas and promote a political settlement with Israel over all the Palestinian territory. I have another question, such as will they will run Hamas and Fatah in a joint list or separate list? If you want to listen about it, or if
Yeah, I just want to, we have a number of questions that come through, so I want to at least catch up on these first. What financial support does Sinwar get from the other nations, or from Qatar or the other Arab Emirates, compared to that what Marshall or Hania get?
Okay, Qatar sent a financial aid to Gaza Strip, but the Qatar doesn't like Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar is the head of the political bureau in Gaza. Khaled Mash'al lives in Qatar. If he wants to deliver financial aid to Gaza, if Khaled Mash'al agree, Qatar will send the aid for Gaza. But if Khaled Mash'al will say no, they will not, or they slow the aid to Gaza. Qatar wants to weaken Yahya Sinwar and to bring Khaled Mash'al to Gaza, to make switch between them. They don't like Sinwar because Sinwar has the support of the military wing, the Azadin al-Qassam, and Khaled Mash'al doesn't have the support of Azadin al-Qassam. They hate him. They doesn't want him in Gaza. And in the middle of March, we will know who elected in Hamas. They have also election in Hamas, not only in the Palestinian arena, but in Hamas movement. There are also we have elections, internal elections, and Khaled Mash'al want to re-elect to the head of the political bureau, and he, with Qatar, want to weaken Yahya Sinwar, the head of the political bureau in Gaza. The Qatari want Khaled Mash'al in, bring him in Gaza. They want him to control in the future the PLO, and by their influence on the PLO and on Gaza Strip, they will take control also on the West Bank. This is not the interest of Israel, that Hamas will control the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We have to make them build a unite government, Fatah and Hamas together, not one on the expense of the other.
Okay, there was another question. There's the city Rawabi that's in the West Bank, and the person asked the question: can the lessons from the building of that Palestinian city be applied at all to the Gaza situation? Is there the potential of such a thing ever developing?
I think that Israel has to remove the siege from Gaza. We have to make security arrangements. The German, the United States, the French, the British government, by all the community, the international community, we can remove the siege and make the security arrangements, good security arrangements, and in Gaza you can do it, but not with Qatar, not with Qatar. Qatar now pledged $60 million, and the European Union has pledged over $24 million to help construct a natural gas pipeline running from Israel into the Gaza Strip. The European Union, United States, and the other Arab states, very rich. In the Gulf, we have very rich states such as the UAE, but not Qatar. Qatar wants to intervene, to deepen its intervention in Gaza in order to topple the Egyptian regime. And the Egyptian regime is a very important ally to Israel. And they want an Islamic regime in Egypt. You see, by Azmi Bshara, a former member of the Knesset. He lives today in Qatar. The Qataris gave him a lot of money, millions of dollars, in order to open Al Arabi Al Jadid. It's an internet website and a TV channel. It's called Al Arabi Al Jadid. And there he all the time incite against Egypt, against Israel, against Syria, against Libya. And we have to understand Qatar is very dangerous state. And if we really want to develop the Gaza Strip without the Qataris, we can do it.
Okay. What attempt has been made to work with the generation in waiting to make for a long-term peaceful relationship?
Because I think that the weakening of Fatah and Hamas as a movement, as a resistance movement in the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, today it confronts huge challenges, and the younger generation see the two movements that has to build an independent state for them and to advance them to another future, to a good future, and to peace with Israel. The armed struggle and the negotiation, the two ways were failed. Most of the Palestinians, the younger generation, want peace with Israel after the signing of the Oslo Accords. The Palestinian people, and especially the young people, were so happy. There was an euphoria in the Palestinian territories and also in Israel. But after the Israeli governments and and Arafat and all and Hamas and the Jihad Islamic factions and the Intifada, the second Intifada, all of the military rounds caused that Israel stopped the political negotiations with the Palestinians. Abu Mazen, and I think that the Israelis, how I can say it, missed the opportunity, a very big opportunity that there was with Abu Mazen, and I think that today the young people looked at the elections and they have a hope that maybe they could make a change, a big change, but I think that they will punish Fatah and Hamas movements. They will punish them in these elections, and they will maybe, if they will vote for another a list, not of Hamas and Fatah. They will punish them for all the suffering, the years of suffering that they suffer from them, from the Israelis, and from themselves. So I think that in the basic, they want peace with Israel. But I am very concerned because if they will not get a state, an independent Palestinian state, they will go and they will strive for one state solution. And this will be a very tragic solution for Israel.
I guess we're running a little late. I have one more question. Can Sinwar, you mentioned about, these other gangs, all these other violent players, in Gaza and around Gaza. Can Sinwar control these armed militias?
Sinwar, if Israel and the international community will decide he is a political partner and they will equip him with a very important political achievements, he will understand that he could trust the international community and he will do what he has to do with these factions. But as Israel doesn't give him anything, and as Fatah doesn't want to reconcile with him, so he doesn't have any other choice but to include and to cooperate with the radical factions. But if he will believe that there are somebody outside that really want to strengthen him and equip him with a very huge and important achievements, political achievements, that he can go to his people and say to them, look, the political path can deliver and we have to go to the political path. But if Israel insists not to remove the siege, and if the United States and the international community insist not to cooperate with Yahya Sinwar, so he doesn't have any opportunity, any other choice, but to stay with the armed militias and cooperate with them.
All right, well, we're running a little late. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and give a special thank you to Dr. Ronit Marzan for sharing her knowledge with us. It's really been very enlightening. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and Purim Sameach.